And now I'm asking Dr. Alon Goshen-Gottstein, who is the founder and the director of the ENIA Interfaith Institute and director of the Center for the Study of Rabbinic Thought at Beit Morasha in Jerusalem, to come and to give us his wisdom. Thank you.
So in the spirit of interreligious tolerance, I'm going to offer Trinitarian thanks. The first part of the Trinitarian thanks is to Natan, who has taken the initiative to organize this evening, even though in his humility he first acknowledged Yukam and then second the Elijah Interfaith Institute. In fact, it's he who has been the driving spirit behind this evening. It's he who envisioned it, he who made it possible, and therefore above and beyond. Secondly, I'd like to give Kvod Achsania, but Achsania is obviously a female noun, right? Like all things that end with a ya. And that highlights the importance of the feminine aspect in involving Gila Rose. And I say this not simply to be flippant, but because Gila has, as of last year, joined the Elijah Board of World Religious Leaders, and we have always a dearth of religious and educational leaders from the Jewish perspective, and she's one of the women who's filling a very important role, and therefore I'm particularly grateful for her involvement in Elijah as a whole, involved, and as part of that also for her willingness to host us here at Yokar, which for our own family has been sort of a home religious base for several decades, actually now millennia by now if you include the previous millennium or this one. So we feel at home here, but in particular we feel welcome. We're grateful to you, Gila, for your reception. And the third thanks is the invisible thanks represented by the empty chair next to Limor and by the institution that Limor belongs to, and this is Eugene Korn. This project would have never happened without Eugene. Even though I agree to take credit for thinking of the project and for initiating and making it happen, but the crucial step of giving birth to the book, taking the Scranton papers and saying we must publish them, we must do something, would have never happened without Eugene's insistence, pushing, accompanying the project from start to finish, and full-fledged partnership at every step along the way. And therefore, he would have loved to have been here. In today's world, nobody can guarantee being always at the same time at the same place as a given event requires, but I remain genuinely grateful to him for his contribution, and therefore we can do for him a one-hand clap. Since he's absent, we can just okay, now you can clap. So I just changed this morning how I conceptualized the presentation, and therefore I hope I can pull it off in the way that I revisioned it, because I didn't really have time to write it up. And here's what I would propose to do in the next 35 minutes, because we agreed that I'm giving two talks in the price of one, right? I have two chapters in this book, and what I've decided to do is to try and present both the project and the particular subject of Hinduism in one condensed lecture. I'm going to start by talking about why I think this project is important, what we sought to accomplish through it, above and beyond the important insights already shared by Natan. Sorry, by Rabbi Cardozo. And then move on, shall we say, to look at one specific test case, which is the test case of Hinduism from that particular perspective. I go back to 1997, Beit Morasha. In those days, 2 homes ago, we were living in Yeshurun. On the staff, Yehuda Gelman, 2 people to my left, myself and others. Danny Sperber here was also still at the time a member of that venerable community of teachers. And at the time, I had just started the Elijah Interfaith Institute. We had started initially, at the time it was called the Elijah School for the Study of Wisdom and World Religions. We started it as a consortium of 13 Jerusalem-based academic religious institutions. One of them was Beit Morasha. We started to do programs across the board between consortium members running various programs, activities, summer schools, etc. At one point we had an event involving the Beit Morasha students, and very soon thereafter, almost as soon as we started to work on this issue, the question was, why do we need to be doing this? Why is this important? What is the religious imperative for us as religious Jews to be involved in interfaith dialogue? And what does it mean for us? Something I had taken for granted was not at all taken for granted. And I remember I mentioned you also remember the panel we did about this Beit Marashah. It was like one of the first things we ever did was to do this panel on this particular issue. And since then, for what is now almost 15 years, we've been walking on 2 feet. One foot has been conversing amongst members of different religions, sharing ideas, sharing projects, research, reflection, spirituality, wide range of activities. But at the same time, initially for Judaism, and then it expanded to other events. Following the Scranton conference that gave birth to this book, actually we got a grant to do a Muslim theology of religions, and we're looking to work with other religions. We discovered each religion needs to do its own homework, thinking through what does it mean for my religion to be engaged in dialogue with the others. There's so many ways of doing this. It could be we all live in one community, especially in the diaspora. Most of the world here, the dynamics are very different, of course. Theological challenges the same, practical ones may be different, but the core question remains, what does it mean for us to be living alongside one another? What is our daily reality? That's should we say, low-grade interfaith. The daily concerns, they can never be divorced from theological concerns, but they don't necessarily attract them. Higher aspects of it touch on the more theoretical, theological, philosophical, mystical, spiritual concerns. As the stakes rise, you also ask yourself increasingly, what does it mean from the perspective of my tradition? And this leads us to, and I want to introduce here a term that for many of you may be the first time you hear it. The term is theology of religions. Theology of religions is that field that is currently practiced wherein, within the broader discipline of theology, one thinks about how one thinks about other religions. So they call it theology of religions. And theology of religions is a field that has grown over the last, it's been growing over half a century, but the last 20 years, 30 years, we've seen a great increase in work in theology of religions. And as all theologies is Christian, also theology of religions has grown mainly amongst Christians. But the challenge of formulating what other religions mean to me, what my religion thinks of other religions, is a universal challenge relevant to all religions. And at Elijah, we came to the conclusion we must cultivate a more robust Jewish theology of religions. And to that end, we convened the Scranton Conference. To that end, we've had follow-up activities in the form of a website that we're about to release now that's looking at some of the issues we'll be talking about tonight, having developed curriculum material in partnership with Yeshivat Chovei Torah, which is one of our partners. Various other activities and publications that are to see the light of press, God willing, not too far from now, all of which seek to not only advance interfaith relations, but to advance our own understanding of the theory of what is involved in interfaith relations. To a large extent, we are not only starting late, but we are at a unique constellation that provides us with very specific opportunities that are on the whole ill-addressed. We're coming from a situation of exile, diaspora, into a homeland. We're busy putting our energies into survival, into our physical protection. We're worried about pluralism, acceptance within our own society. Most people don't really have much energy to put into what do other religions mean for us. And yet, the situation of having a new homeland, the situation of changes, especially within the Christian churches and their relationship to Judaism, the changes within dynamics between world religions and the new global village in which one has constantly come up against one another, the changes of our youth traveling and visiting other cultures and gaining new exposure, all these add up. Each of them you might be able to deal with independently. But the sum total of these come together as in ways that are unprecedented by creating new challenges, new opportunities. And these are issues that our religious leadership must address. And if it doesn't address, then ultimately, like other issues, some say, we will draw the consequences of our failure to address them. And therefore, I completely resonate with Natan's resonating with my feeling that this really is a burning contemporary issue and possibly one of the most important issues that we need to address. Where does Judaism hold in relation to other religions? And the reason it's so important is because if we cannot say where we are in relation to the others, then we are missing something important about our own ability to state where we are holding what our continuing relevance is. And if our own continuing relevance is only in upkeeping our ongoing traditions, it'll work for those it works for, but there will be many who will find themselves unsatisfied. And therefore, to remain vital, meaningful, we have to be able to frame ourselves in a broader framework. And that broader framework is not the situation that most youth movements, Ala Bnei Akiva, educate to, in which you set up a mock religion in the form of Christianity or Islam, and you set Judaism over against the real thing or the better thing. Because sooner or later people are going to get to learn that the other religion isn't that mock religion that you had set up, and then the issues are going to arise. And therefore it involves dealing with the other religions in a real way, not in their imagined self that you use up only as a, even you quote a dakhlil, as a scarecrow, that you destroy in order to show how much better you are. And therefore, serious thought about other religions is our own theological need. And this is what's informing this particular project. The project has been conceived, or shall we say, my own lead essay suggests 4 areas that need to be tackled as part of a contemporary approach to Jewish religions. Ideally, it would have been lovely if all 4 panelists could have addressed all 4 aspects, but that's not the reality, for time constraints, for a variety of other things. So a full mapping out of these issues in relation to all religions is the desideratum of the project long term. Tonight we're going to have various tastes of what that looks like in specific in relation to some of them. I will try and offer a more comprehensive view in relation to my own test case, that of Hinduism. What are these 4 areas? The first question, which is not at all self-evident, does Judaism recognize the legitimacy for other religions to exist? If that seems to you a silly question, that means you don't know Maimonides well enough, and you don't know the Jewish halacha well enough. But the fact is that from perspective of traditional Jewish framing, there is a serious halachic option that has to be negotiated and thought through. There's only 2 tracks. One track is the Mosaic Revelation, 613 commandments. All the others have the option, one of 2 options: either follow the 7 Noahide commandments, or convert to Judaism. There's no real room of legitimacy for any other religion, period. No ritual, prayer at a pinch. Either they fit into our framework or they don't fit in at all. And this is a perspective that many people in contemporary orthodoxy still adhere to, maybe I should say still adhere to, nothing else because of the fact that it is governed by important halachic voices, and is propagated by people who don't feel any urgency in establishing alternative paradigms. There are alternative paradigms, and I will say that I think the most important of these alternative paradigms is Rabbi Menachem HaMeiri, whose own theory of religions goes far beyond what has been often recognized, and that is in the recognition that Christianity is not avodah zarah, and in having articulated a broad theory of religions and religious legitimacy. Religious system that upholds morality, has a spiritual life, and has some notion of God that we can recognize, even though there will be significant differences between our understanding of God and that religion's understanding of God, is a valid religion. And as long as there's a valid religion, those people can practice their rituals, can go on doing their teaching, and they are to be treated as equals, with the extreme that if a Jew were to convert to one of those religions, he should be considered as a member of that religion rather than simply as an apostate. A very, very far-reaching and radical theory, shall we say, of practical pluralism. We have to do more work to consider its theological, philosophical underpinnings. And I personally am of the opinion that Meiri provides for us in this generation possibly the most important resource, not just for halachic thinking, but also philosophical reflection upon other religions. A great resource, one that was lost for many centuries, one that was only rediscovered in the 20th century, and to a certain extent some of the difficulty of his re-entering the halachic mainstream is in fact related to his attitude to other religions. So there are ways of negotiating that, but this is the first issue that has to be contemplated, that is the very validity and legitimacy of other religions. Second issue, and here I would say this is the defining issue from traditional Jewish perspective, avodah zarah. Do other religions, well, lots of ways of putting this, do they worship the same God as us or another God? Or is their understanding of God correct or incorrect, and therefore avodah zarah? Or is their approach, avodah zarah for the 1 or 2 non-Jewish members of the audience means foreign worship, okay, which is more or less the equivalent of idolatry. that strictly speaking, the term is not idolatry, it's foreign worship. And therefore, the other possibility is it worshiping the right God but in the wrong means? So there's a range of nuances that are associated with what might constitute avodah zarah. But the defining issue in relationship to other religions is, are they avodah zarah or not? And there probably is not a single religion, for those of you who may not be aware, Islam included, that has been free of the charge of avodah zarah. And Jews, the mosaic distinction that Osman brought to our consciousness, as that Rabbi Cardozo just mentioned, basically leads us not simply to claim our religion is true and another religion is false, but also to couch that in the language that describes the other religion as avodah zarah. Now, that doesn't have to be the case, but it's often the case. And once again, there's possibly a relationship between the fact that the strict canons for the definition of avodah zarah suggested by Maimonides, when they are applied, they leave most religions, with the notable exception of Islam, as coming under the category of avodah zarah. Important point to bear in mind here, and I think this is going to be crucial for any future Jewish reflection and for the present Jewish reflection. Do Jews and non-Jews follow the same yardstick? Is what is expected of Jews and what is expected of non-Jews the same in terms of avodah zarah, or are there different criteria that apply to Jews and non-Jews? For Rambam, the exact same criteria apply for Jews and non-Jews. Since the same criteria apply, you have no room for being more lenient, more tolerant, more accepting various compromises, various alternatives, more complex notions of understanding of the Godhead, whatever. Because if it doesn't go for us, it doesn't go. So no room for religion, no room for alternative understandings. This is not the only possible view of other religions. And broadly speaking, the continuum of positions on this particular issue ranges from one extreme, the position of Maimonides Rambam just described. At the other end is the Meiri, who basically has a very minimalist definition of the requirements of avodah zarah of another nation, because his guiding thought is, by their fruit you shall know them. If you see they have a moral life, you might expand it. If you see they have a spiritual life, then you know the thing is good. Bad religion is an immoral religion. A good religion produces good fruit. If the good religion, you see it produces good fruit, and they recognize God, it doesn't matter if they think right or not. What's the difference if someone really gets it right philosophically or not? It would seem that he places, even though Maimonidean himself, he places much less emphasis on the question of getting it right philosophically or theoretically or dogmatically, and much more emphasis on the question of getting it right lifestyle-wise. And therefore, if the living results of what a religious community can produce are commendable, positive, maybe even enviable in certain cases, then that religion is legitimate religion. And consequently, for Meiri, there is much less concern with all those questions of the theory of understanding another religion, problem of images of other religion, problems of rituals of other religions, provided we can identify a core notion of a recognizable God that has some commonality, not full commonality, but some commonality with our own. In-between position, which has governed the history of Jewish-Christian relations, starting out as a very limited category and evolving into a principled approach to another religion, is a position that grows out of the work of the Tosafists. And basically, it goes by the code name of shittuf. Shittuf means worshipping another being alongside God. Originally, it probably referred to taking an oath in God's name and in the name of the saints. Later authorities understood that as worshipping God alongside a human being, in other words, Jesus. Eventually, it grew by the 17th and 18th century into a position that states there are different criteria that apply for Jews and non-Jews. Jews have to worship God exclusively. Non-Jews may worship God alongside another being. And therefore, you simultaneously establish respect for another religion, and at the same time you also have room for saying that that's only good for them because there are other standards, other requirements that apply for ourselves. Eugene Korn's essay in our volume suggests that the shittuf paradigm, in other words, the paradigm that suggests that Christianity is not avodah zarah, is the reigning, the most common, in other words, ultimately majority perspective of the history of Jewish thought towards Christianity. We've had some arguments about that. I've tried to tone him down. In my view, that's not the case. And in the talk that I gave at the Cardozo Academy, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, I argued that even if that was the case, it certainly changed. And certainly for the poskim in Israel, since its foundation, there seems to be a significant swing back to the Maimonidean position, away from the position permitting shittuf. In any event, Avodah Zarah can be tackled through various options. But of course there has to be theological will, or political will, or communal will in order to make such a move. So that's the second issue. The third issue is the issue that Rabbi Cardozo already alluded to, and that's the issue of religious truth. Now, religious truth can be variously considered. My most recent theological engagement goes back to last Friday night on the streets of Bnei Brak, where I went for a Shabbat honoring the Rebbe's of Mojitz. Mojitz is a household name in this particular establishment here in Yakov. Shabbat, this week we have 2 yard sites of 2 Rebbe's there. I went for Shabbat. Someone there knew that I do interreligious work. He asked me, what exactly do you do? So I explained to him. He says, "Ken, אבל כל האמונות של אנשים אלה זה אמונות תפלות." He says, but he says to me in his own view of theology, he says, yes, but the faith of all the other religions is nonsense. So I said to him, well, is it absolutely imperative that we continue to believe that, or are there other possibilities? To which he retorted, yes, but if we do believe that, then what it remains of the uniqueness of Judaism. In other words, he made, and he's not the only one to do so, he's just a good product of a bad education, he made the association between the fact that in order to preserve uniqueness in Jewish identity, we have to turn all other religions into expressions of falsehood. And that's the challenge. Is that really so? What do we mean by religious truth? Do we mean by religious truth that as long as we can recite a formula, as long as we can look at something, then that makes that particular thing true, or are there other ways of looking at truth? And I want to get to Hinduism, but let me just say that there are a variety of possible strategies that have been applied throughout the generations. I hope for one that Dov is going to share with us the strategy that, for instance, the Maimonidean dynasty, beginning with Rambam's son, Rabbi Avraham Maimonides, adopted, of borrowing from Sufism while making the clever claim that this is Jewish, but it only got lost to us, and they were recovering it from them. So one strategy is loss and recovery. Another tradition is the tradition that was already alluded to when Nathan used the word wisdom, and that's the notion, well, other traditions have wisdom, and because they have wisdom, they may be legitimate, and drawing some kind of meaningful distinction between revelation and wisdom. Of course, Mendelssohn comes to mind as an important name here, and very much an underutilized resource in contemporary interreligious relations. A third possible strategy might be to say, there are multiple revelations. I don't know if Dov is going to go that way, but there certainly are precedents within the Ismaili Jewish background, shall we say, of people who held that particular position, that, okay, we have revelations, others have revelations, revelations are adapted to their people, and possibly the latest enunciation of this kind of theology comes from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs' version 1, where in his first edition of Dignity of Difference, he writes that, God speaks to Jews through Judaism, to Christians through Christianity, to Islam, to Muslims through Islam. And by the second version, he's become much more Noahide, and he had to tone that down under political pressure. But Jonathan Sachs' one theology is one particular way of dealing with the problem of religious truth. There are more. I want to leave enough time. I hope you're not looking at the watch. To the question of Hinduism, and I will just therefore mention the fourth issue, which is not so much a theological concern, but it's certainly a community concern. That's the concern for identity. I go back to this sweet boy on the streets of Bnei Brak. If they have validity, then what room is there for us? What value is there for us? What need is there for us? Differently put, after 2,000 years of threatened identity, much of which includes forced persecutions and conversions and challenges to being able to maintain our identity, what does it mean to begin to think about alternative paradigms of how we are placed in relation to other religions, and in what way can we ensure that these enhance rather than weaken our identity? Is it the case that in order to weaken our identity we have to project false stereotypes of the other, or is there a way that we can uphold our identity while giving dignity to the other? That's of course the challenge. Is it the case that when people are already traveling to other cultures, we do much better to cope with them than to pretend they don't exist? Is it the case, as over a decade, almost 15 years of working in this field with students, indicates that serious engagement with the other strengthens your identity rather than weakens your identity. My own studies of Jews who've moved to Hinduism suggest that Jews with no serious background have always come away weakened by an exposure to another religion. Jews with a strong background end up being reinforced in their spirituality by seeing the best of another religion and receiving inspiration and motivation to follow suit and being strengthened rather than being weakened. But whatever it is, we're dealing with identity enforcing strategies. These are educational concerns, these are philosophical concerns, but these are concerns that we cannot ignore. Let me move on to Hinduism, and I will try to say a few brief things about the 4 chapters. I won't say much about the first issue, about the legitimacy of another religion, because that was already addressed in the relationship between Maimonides and Meiri in my opening comments, or the first part. Avodah Zarah. The question then is, are we able in relationship to Hinduism to extend paradigms that were developed in relationship to Christianity? In my own view, I see no reason why not. In other words, for a Maimonidean perspective of other religions of Avodah Zarah, Hinduism will clearly emerge as Avodah Zarah, and there's very little room for maneuvering around that. But if you go for a shittuf theology, there already are on record various important voices who are willing to consider Hinduism in terms of shittuf. The first of these is the late Chief Rabbi Herzog, who in a pre-state publication reflecting on what the future of other religions in the about to be born state of Israel suggests that in the same way that Christians have the right to live in this future state of Israel as a minority religion because they practice shittuf, and shittuf is legitimate for non-Jews, the same would apply to Hindus, even though he doesn't know as much about Hinduism. A later version of this has been recently articulated by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who has really taken it to almost unprecedented elaboration. Let me illustrate this. One of the issues that are at stake, and one of the ways of assessing what Judaism has to say to other religions, has to do with the question of what is our vision for other religions. Do we have anything meaningful to say to other religions? It's okay that we're concerned about our own flock and we seek to protect their own identity. But do we as Jews, or shall we say as educators, as rabbis, or as leadership, do we have something meaningful to say to other religions? Or you do your thing, we do ours. Or rather, you continue making your errors, it's none of our business, you'll go to hell, whatever, see you in the next world, or see you when Mashiach comes, or whatever. Is there anything meaningful that we have to say to them? And you can test that in one of 2 ways. You can test it, first of all, are there Jews out there having something meaningful to say to other religions? Okay? Some, not many. And then what's your vision of the eschaton? Will everyone become Jewish? Are they going to preserve their identity? How you envision the future will determine, in ways that are direct, even if they're not prominent, will determine how you see the present. So what is our vision? Rabbi Steinsaltz is very extreme. His reading of shittuf is so principled that his reading, unlike the Rambam's, he reads it into the Rambam, and in the future, non-Jews will not be expected to give up their own religion. They'll be able to maintain their religion, maintain their errors. As long as it's close enough, we can live with a compromised monotheism on behalf of other religions. And consequently, we have to adopt an attitude of tolerance. And therefore, he takes this notion of shittuf, extends it all the way, and includes in it consciously and explicitly Hinduism as well. So the shittuf paradigm certainly works. Meiri, I certainly see absolutely no reason should not apply to the case of Hinduism. The case of Hinduism is certainly a religion that's governed by moral laws. It's certainly a religion that produces spiritual fruit. And certainly by the definition of a religion, whatever you bring to bear on that term, Hinduism is a religion, full-fledged religion within that definition. These issues have received even greater public prominence in a series of summits that were carried out between the chief rabbi and the, shall we say, representative body of Hindu leaders, summits that took place since between 2007 and 2 years ago was the third one. And the upshot of those particular summits was an affirmation that falls short of the declaration that Hinduism is not Avodah Zarah, but could lay the groundwork for it. In those affirmations, both important affirmations, the Jews and Hindus, or Jewish and Hindu leaders, including chief rabbis of Israel, signed a declaration affirming that Hindus worship the supreme being alone. In other words, from what would seem to have been necessary conditions for recognition of the validity of Hinduism, and therefore of holding a dialogue and then also potentially of having further relationships with Christians and with Hinduism, the rabbis, shall we say, signed on the dotted line that Hindus worship the supreme being alone, supposedly clearing the way for avodah, for Hindus being cleared of the charge of avodah zarah. The Hindus certainly understood it that way. Did the Jews understand it that way? Now that's a difficult question. In my view, they didn't. In my view, I'm not sure that the chief rabbis and other rabbis who signed that really understood fully the extent of what they were signing, either for reasons of language or for reasons of theology. And that in signing that, they may have not necessarily intended that. The proof is that Rabbi Metzger didn't go back to Rabbi Eliashiv and tell him, hold it, we can start wearing wigs made in India. So I don't think it went that far. But some people went there. One of the people sitting in the room now is Rabbi Danny Sperber. He was a member of those conversations. He took part of them. And he himself, despite having had contact with Hinduism for several decades, those particular summits were so meaningful to him that they ended up leading to a revision of his own thought. We at Cardozo had a lecture on this a year and a half ago or so. And he has gone, as they say in Hebrew, al kol hakupa. In other words, he's not even applying a me'iri, he's not even applying a shittuf paradigm, but he's really buying into what is fundamentally the most important way that halachists make decisions, by looking at the intentions and self-understanding of the other. He's buying into those understanding, and based on that, he's basically saying, if they say they're not avodah zarah, we got to go along with them and agree. And he, in a publication that I read most recently 2 days ago, after having read previous drafts of it, he really upholds a very, very principled view of Hinduism as not being avodah zarah. So the Jewish voices in the new millennium divide between shaitel burners and those who affirm the legitimacy of Hinduism. But you can see that Hinduism becomes the test case for how to deal with another religion from this perspective, and to what extent listening to the other, serious dialogue and engagement are going to change the view. And therefore, here we start to see where dialogue really makes a difference. Now, is the only way to deal with Hinduism through the concern for avodah zarah? Now, that's an interesting question. If you look at the history of how Jews have dealt with Hinduism, you see that the Middle Ages didn't know anything about avodah zarah, or very little. I mean, there's traces of it in the travels of Benjamin of Tudela, or as they call it in Hebrew, of Metudela. But the most Jews referred to Hindus through a whole other paradigm. India was a land of wisdom, and the Hindus were sages of wisdom. Wisdom correct, wisdom false, you can argue with it, how it stands in relation to prophecy. But the main concern of Jews was Hindus as a culture of wisdom. Now, if it's a culture of wisdom, this takes us into the realm not of a concern for avodah zarah, but the concern for truth. Do they have a truth? What does it mean for them to have a truth? What does it mean to say, for instance, let's just push this as one test case, and I really want to finish to leave time for. I'm sure I'm really taking more time than I should have. Let's push this to the limit. Judaism has a view, classical biblical views continued in rabbinic literature, recognize God and creation as distinct. Hinduism affirms God as manifesting in all of creation, and therefore is potentially accessible through all of creation. But Judaism eventually comes to give birth to spiritual views that are as, you can call them pantheistic or panentheistic, as the best of Hinduism. No, I'm not talking about Spinoza, but I am talking about various streaks in Hasidism, the thought of Rav Kook, and other thoughts. So, what is the truth of Judaism? Is it the biblical truth? I mean, when we speak about these great reified institutions like Judaism and Hinduism, we tend to lose sight of the nuance. But it's the nuance of what it is that you bring into exposition in relation, in dialogue with one another, that determines the effectiveness. So you can't say that a view is mistaken if it exists in Judaism. So where is the room for truth if in the history of one tradition ideas have evolved in a certain direction and another tradition teaches them as the basis of something? And what does that mean about the kind of conversation that we need to have between us in thinking about our own truth and our own understanding? And in what way would we need to then redefine truth? And I would take as an extension of the concern for truth, the concern for spirituality. The buzzword didn't exist some decades ago, But nowadays you can't talk about religion without talking about spirituality, and you certainly cannot talk about India without talking about spirituality. Now, spirituality may fit best within the framework of a Meiri view of judging a religion by its fruits, not when you look at those fruits from the moral perspective, but from the spiritual perspective. You look at the spiritual perspective of another religion, you can consider its validity. So how is the truth understood when you get people of high spiritual caliber in another religion? How does that challenge us to think these issues through? Some young rabbis are starting to do some work in that. Some of you, Herzl Hefter, Yaakov Nagen, there are a few youngish rabbis, I say young is sort of up to 50 or around 50, who devote themselves, all the rest of you should feel old by now. It was an unsuccessful joke. So these group of younger rabbis, they're looking at these issues and they're trying to think through their philosophical implications in relation to other religions. But certainly Hinduism allows us to look at these two issues together. It challenges in that way. But finally, Hinduism challenges in very, very special ways on issues of identity. This has been going on now for 50 years. I read yesterday at a conference that we attended together at Haifa on Jewish-India relations, a statistic that I think is a little too high. Who was it who said that 75% of members in various Hindu sects were Jewish? There was a quote there that I noted. I think 75 is still a slight exaggeration, but Jews are everywhere. Hare Krishna, the number of people who belong to ISKCON is staggering. Transcendental meditation, Muktananda. You name the guru, he's got the Jews with him. You go to India, you have Jews and Jews running the Osho ashram in Pune. You have where you were in the islands, Bahamas, Swami Swarupananda running the Shivananda yoga ashram. You have proportionately Jews are always somewhere else. What happens to Jews when they come into encounter with Hinduism? Maintaining, undermining identity. Interesting publication came out in Ruben Mas, Mehodu V'Ad, edited by Elchan Nanir, bringing together the thoughts of, I fell once by using the term young, I won't use it again, but yes, young authors who have been exposed to India. They're coming back to Judaism with certain riches that they've discovered through their exposure to Hinduism. What does that do to their identity? Does it weaken it? Does it enforce it? We have in relation to India both paradigms. Which is the dominant paradigm? What is our responsibility as educators in order to ensure that it goes one way and not the other? How active should we become? What guidance can we take? It's a phenomenal thing. I mean, people from Uttara, right, our Chugim, are the ones that are going to India. Our rabbis have next to nothing to say about them, next to no guidelines, next to no instruction. It's this great big dark hole that's absorbing, shall we say, 30 to 40% of the religious youth with no, we can guide about whether a skirt should be up to here and not up to there, but we can't guide about how to encounter a major transformative encounter in their religious lives. And that's the gap, that's the challenge, that's what we need to accomplish. So we hope that through our projects we can make a contribution to this. We hope that all of you will be inspired to, through this evening, through the successful purchase and the eventual reading of our book, will be inspired to continue thinking about it, talking about that. And ultimately the aspiration is to make this as important an agenda and conversation item as various other items that we may have not recognized previously are important, but that do determine and condition the future of our spiritual life in the Jewish people. Thank you. I'm giving the microphone back to the young Rabbi Carnozo.
Thank you very much, Alon. This was an excellent introduction to all of the different issues which are discussed within this book, and far beyond. It reminds me of when I was about 16 years old. It was the first time that I ever entered a shul, a Bet Knesset, in a little town in Holland called Haarlem. Your Haarlem, or their Haarlem, is called after the Dutch one. And I entered in that shul, and every morning a young man would walk in and say to all the people sitting in that shul, "You are sitting here for nothing. There is no God." After that, he would walk up to his seat, take his talit, make a bracha, put it on, and prayed the whole of the morning prayers, and Musaf carefully listened to Parashat HaShavua. And this happened week after week, and I was a complete newcomer, and I didn't know what this meant. How would this be possible? So one day I got enough of it, and I went to him and I said to him, listen, I'm an outsider, you seem to be an insider, you seem to know things I don't know. If there is no God, so what are you doing here, and why are you praying? And he said something very important to me, which I will never forget, and still is somehow a guideline for me. And that is this: he said, I don't believe in God, but I do believe in the Jewish tradition. It is the most magnificent tradition around in the world. It holds so much wisdom that if I stop living that way, even when I'm an atheist, I will destroy something which the world in effect is in tremendous need of. I will go home, make kiddush, sing Zumiot with my children. I will learn Parashat HaShavua with them. I eat kosher. I don't believe that anything of this was ever given by God, but by some clever people a long time ago. But when I will not keep these laws and I will not live by them, I will destroy one of the greatest and most beautiful things this world has to offer. And therefore I'm coming to shul. I will pray to God who actually does not exist.